Breaking news, breaking news. Allegedly, Fat Joe is being sued for 20 million in an explosive civil RICO complaint. Allegedly, there's sexual misconduct going on. There's things with minors going on. It's it is quite a lot, ladies and gentlemen. So with that being said, let's get into it. But first, before we get into it, shout out to Chronicle Speaks for this. Now, let's get into it.
I'm not one to gossip, but I will bring you the tea. Welcome to Chronicle Speaks.
Please, I don't have any time for any gossip now. Eh? Yes.
All lies will be exposed. That's all.
Now, these words have replayed in my head for the past couple of days after lawsuit has come out involving some pretty powerful men in the Hollywood hierarchy. This time it's none other than your boy Fat Joe. Now, Terrence T.A. Dixon, Fat Joe's longtime hype man, has filed a $20 million federal lawsuit in New York accusing the rapper of years of abuse, exploitation, and coercion. Dixon alleges that over their 16-year working relationship, he was subjected to financial fraud, violent intimidation, and even sexual manipulation, sometimes involving a youngin'. Now, this suit claims that Dixon contributed creatively to major songs like Congratulations and Ice Cream, but was systematically erased while Fat Joe and his team reaped the benefits. Even more disturbing, Dixon says he was forced into over 4,000 sexual acts under threats and constant surveillance, fearing for his safety and his job. Now, Fat Joe, whose real name is Joseph Cartagena, is now being represented by high-profile attorney Joe Tacopina, and these allegations mark...
Wait a minute, Tacopina? Wait a minute, wasn't Tacopina ASAP Rocky's lawyer?
a shocking turn in the public image of one of hip-hop's most recognizable figures. We are going to break this story down with the lawsuit and so much more, but before we do, please be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss out on any news regarding this case and so much more. Now let's get back into it. At this point, the lawsuits are just falling out the sky because I honestly thought I was going to give me a 2-day break, but no. And I'll tell you what, the lawsuits that have been coming by lately, these people have not been on my bingo card. And I know I'm not wrong. Which one of y'all knew Fat Joe would be next? I'll wait. Yeah. So to give you a brief summary before we break down the lawsuit, Terrence Dixon, known as T.A., is suing rapper Fat Joe, Joseph Cartagena, for $20 million, accusing him of running a long-term abusive criminal enterprise that exploited Dixon's talents, labor, and even his body. Now, over 16 years, Dixon says he worked as a hype man, lyricist, vocalist, and security, contributing to hits like Congratulations, Ice Cream, and Money Over Bitches. But instead of being paid or credited, Dixon claims he was systematically robbed of royalties, forced into silence, and subjected to sexual coercion, sometimes under surveillance or at parties allegedly involving youngsters. Now, the lawsuit names others in Fat Joe's circle, including Pistol Pete Torres and Richard Rich Player Jobster, accusing them of threats and violence. It also implies Roc Nation and CEO Desiree Perez is helping to cover up the exploitation and financial misconduct. Dixon alleges that he was denied rightful...
Now, I gotta pause it for a second. Now, if anyone knows anything about Desiree Perez, outside of Roc Nation, allegedly there was something with her and her daughter. I can't remember it at this time. I'm gonna revisit it. But with that being said, let's get back into Fat Joe.
For payments, while fake documents were filed with BMI and ASCAP to erase his authorship and funnel royalties to Fat Joe. Fat Joe is accused of laundering money, committing tax fraud, even using burner social media accounts to threaten Dixon with statements like, "We let you live." The suit cites RICO violations, witness intimidation, and retaliation, including a separate baseless lawsuit filed by Rock Nation and Fat Joe allegedly meant to scare Dixon into silence. Dixon is asking the court to hold all involved parties accountable for years of exploitation, deception, and abuse. Now let's get into it. So this lawsuit is very lengthy. I'm not going to read all of it. We're going to read parts, but let me first summarize a little bit of it. So from 2005 to 2022, Dixon worked without a formal contract, but was promised 15% ownership and royalties on songs he helped write and perform, like All the Way Up, which was a huge hit, Congratulations, and Ice Cream. But despite shaping these songs with his lyrics, hooks, and background vocals, Dixon was erased from official records, never listed in BMI, ASCAP, or any performing rights organization. Now, Fat Joe and his business entities, Slate Inc., Sneaker Addict Touring, and Rock Nation, allegedly filed fake contracts and backdated documents to falsely claim 100% of the publishing rights. Now, Dixon claims this deliberate fraud cost him at least $600,000 in royalties and left him professionally invisible. Now, the live performance exploitation. Dixon also claims that he was shortchanged on touring income. Performance contracts allocated around $3,000 per show for his role, but he typically received just $250 in off-the-books cash. In one example, Fat Joe allegedly kept a $30,000 payment from Live Nation meant for Dixon and used it to pay off personal IRS debt. Now, he also accused the enterprise of stealing over $60,000 in per diem payment meant to cover food, lodging, and travel. Also, as a result, Dixon says he was often left sleeping in airports in unsafe accommodations while Fat Joe and his entourage traveled in luxury. Now, the lawsuit goes far beyond money. Dixon says that Fat Joe used psychological manipulation and intimidation to keep him compliant. He often warned Dixon, nobody leaves.
Really? Notice that the pattern is the same. The same pattern Diddy used, and allegedly the same pattern that Tyler Perry's using. Notice that the pattern is the same. Let's continue.
Terror Squad in one piece and reference violent incidents like the attack on rapper Cuban Link as a way to reinforce that dissent would be punished. Now, Dixon describes constant fear of abandonment in foreign countries, erratic pain, public humiliation, and threats of violence. These tactics allegedly left him with severe anxiety, PTSD, and emotional trauma, making him feel trapped for over a decade. Now, the sexual coercion allegations. Some of the most disturbing allegations involve forced sex acts, including in the presence of others and under surveillance. Dixon claims that these were orchestrated by Fat Joe and used to degrade and control him, sometimes involving youngsters, and taking place across Miami, Germany, Spain, North Carolina, and elsewhere. He says these acts were not private or isolated, but an intentional part of a culture of humiliation maintained by Fat Joe and enforced by associates like Pistol Pete Torres and Richard Rich Player Jobster. Now, the involvement of Rock Nation. Rock Nation, which began managing Fat Joe around 2017, is accused of playing a major role in the cover-up, allegedly helped conceal stolen royalties.
No, because why did no one tell me about pair eyewear sooner? I've been wearing glasses since the first grade.
Cover-up allegedly helped conceal stolen royalties and approved fraudulent publishing records. Took 10% of all Fat Joe's revenue, giving them operational control and knowledge of royalty structures, filed a baseless lawsuit against Dixon and his lawyers to intimidate and silence him when he began to assert his rights. Appointed a manager that Dixon reported to directly, supporting claims that Rock Nation was a joint employer, not a third party. Now, there's also a woman by the name of Erica Juliana Moriera. Moriera is a lawyer affiliated with the enterprise, allegedly, and she helped create fake contracts and backdated split sheets to erase Dixon's authorship, according to Dixon. He's saying that she participated in fraudulent corporate filings to hide money and was directly involved in diverting royalty income from Dixon to Fat Joe's companies. Her legal actions were key to maintaining the illusion that Fat Joe owned 100% of the creative works Dixon helped make. He also claims witness intimidation and online threats. Dixon says Fat Joe or his team used burner social media accounts like Big G and Dr. Zabag to send threatening messages such as, "You love your family, right? File back in 48 hours. We let you live." These were allegedly designed to frighten
Oh,
Dixon
this sound
and
like
obstruct
threats
legal
to me.
proceedings, violating federal witness tampering and RICO statutes. The lawsuit pretty much paints Fat Joe as the leader of a criminal enterprise that used manipulation, fraud, violence, and fear to exploit Dixon's talents while enriching himself and his inner circle. Dixon claims he spent 16 years believing he was a partner, only to realize he's being systematically erased and abused, and he's now asking the court to hold Fat Joe, his companies, and partners like Roc Nation and Erica Moriera accountable under civil RICO laws, forced labor statutes, and federal fraud claims. Now let's get into the claims of coercive control. Now, Fat Joe's control over the plaintiff extended far beyond mere financial exploitation or denial of credit. Over 16 years, defendant cultivated a deliberate environment of psychological manipulation and persistent threats to ensure plaintiff's continued submission, silence, and loyalty despite ongoing abuse, exploitation, and humiliation. Defendant Cartagena frequently warned plaintiff with chilling explicitness, repeatedly saying nobody leaves Terror Squad in one piece. He often reinforced this threat by openly referencing former associates who had suffered violent reprisal after falling out of favor. For example, defendant explicitly invoked the notorious assault of Louis Cuban Leak Tybin, who was viciously attacked, permanently scarred, and publicly humiliated following his departure from defendant's circle. These statements were not merely idle threats or exaggeration. They constituted explicit and calculated warnings deliberately issued to plaintiff to convey that any act of resistance, disloyalty, demand for fair treatment would inevitably lead to severe physical harm, public disgrace, professional sabotage, or worse. Through these sustained and credible threats, defendant intentionally reinforced the message that plaintiff had no visible path to safely exit their working relationship or demand rightful compensation without facing devastating personal consequence. Defendant methodically cultivated an atmosphere where fear or violence, retaliation, abandonment abroad, and career destruction permeated plaintiff's daily experience, effectively destroying any notion of autonomy. Plaintiff's working conditions were oppressive and unpredictable, deliberately designed to amplify his vulnerability and dependency. The defendant employed persistent verbal abuse, threats of physical violence, erratic and insufficient payment, manipulative control over travel and accommodations, and continuous humiliation. Collectively, these coercive tactics resulted in chronic emotional and psychological distress, profound anxiety, and severe trauma that continue to affect plaintiff to this day. Plaintiff was systematically denied basic security or stability, with defendant frequently threatening to strand him in foreign locations without resources or assistance. On multiple occasions, these threats became a reality, leaving plaintiff stranded and without access to adequate food, shelter, or safe transit home, further intensifying his fear, insecurity, and forced dependency. The constant implication of past acts of violence by defendants, such as the brutal attack on Cuban Link, was an intentional strategy. Defendant purposely leveraged these prior violent incidents to establish the credibility and immediacy of his threats, effectively placing plaintiff in a constant state of apprehension and psychological captivity. The looming threat of physical harm was not hypothetical, but concrete, continuously reinforced by explicit verbal warnings and a visible reminder of prior violent acts. So let's now get into the act of sexual exploitation and humiliation under duress. In addition to systematic financial exploitation and relentless psychological abuse, defendant Cartagena deliberately subjected plaintiff Dixon to repeated and severe sexual coercion, manipulation, and humiliation, which further deepened defendant's total control over plaintiff's autonomy, physical safety, and labor. Throughout plaintiff's 16-year period working closely with defendant, plaintiff was routinely coerced into engaging in sexual acts with women, specifically brought by defendant Cartagena to hotel rooms and private gatherings following performances and studio events. Defendant Cartagena frequently arranged and orchestrated these encounters, intentionally creating scenarios designed to reinforce plaintiff's complete submission. Defendant Cartagena regularly monitored these encounters closely, frequently remaining in the room to watch, record, or provide explicit direction and command. Plaintiff did not willingly consent to participate in these acts. Instead, plaintiff submitted solely out of fear of intimidation, retaliation, which defendant repeatedly demonstrated would include financial punishment, professional sabotage, abandonment in foreign countries, or physical harm. On at least one occasion, plaintiff explicitly resisted participating in a coerced sexual encounter arranged by defendant. Defendant immediately retaliated by canceling plaintiff's scheduled flight home, deliberately stranding plaintiff without money, shelter,
Now
or
that's
support,
just petty.
thereby intentionally placing him in an isolated, unsafe, and highly vulnerable position abroad. These calculated and repeated acts of sexual coercion served a clear purpose in plaintiff's enterprise, reinforcing plaintiff's ongoing subordination, obedience, and silence through humiliation, fear, and psychological domination. Sexual compliance became a condition of plaintiff's continued employment, access to essential resources, safe travel, and basic human dignity. The defendant's use of coercive SEX acts underpinned by the threat of job loss, abandonment, or physical harm meets the definition of SEX trafficking by coercion under 18 U.S.C. 1591. The sexual acts were induced not by choice but fear, dependency, and fraud. Each encounter carried an unspoken message: refuse and you lose everything. The plaintiff estimates that over 16 years he was coerced into more than 4,000 sexual acts to maintain his standing with the enterprise. The defendant used these acts not merely for gratification, but as a control mechanism by degrading plaintiff repeatedly and in front of others to undermine plaintiff's autonomy, silence his resistance, and made him emotionally and physically dependent on defendant's approval. The psychological toll was immense. The plaintiff developed symptoms consistent with PTSD, including flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, and emotional detachment. He remains in trauma-informed therapy and continues to experience debilitating anxiety. These experiences were not private or confidential. Enterprise members, including JB, Raul,
Car wreck? Just call all nines. George St. Kendry Lawyers has the experience to help get your money faster.
Zaxby's giant chicken finger quesadillas. Get them while you can. Who's got the sauce?
That's me. Raul, Pistol Pete, and security staff routinely witnessed and participated in these coercive dynamics. Now we're going to skip around a little bit. Like I said, this lawsuit is long. So defendant Cartagena and his senior associates regularly use phrases and terms that functioned as internal codes to direct violence, sexual coercion, intimidation, and other illicit conduct. That included the Dern, which means fat Joe or fat guy, the Don, which was Fat Joe, Bawanches, which is targeted females referred to as bitches, Pyops, which is coerced or violent sexual acts, Calpy, which means no physical assault or slap, Coolin, which means rectum or anus, Ketchup, which means stabbing or slashing, Atandem, which means unalive or him, Theory, which means baby mother, wife, or girlfriend, and Corbin, which means to place a victim in a casket. So these terms were used in text messages, in-person conversations, studio banter, and back-channel communication to direct enforcers, silence dissenters, and coordinate enterprise activities across geographic locations. The coded language was essential and maintained the structure's secrecy while allowing the most extreme form of coercion and violence to be ordered and executed without exposing the enterprise to immediate scrutiny. So now we're going to speak about the youngin' Doe 1. Youngin' Doe 1 is a 16-year-old Dominican girl residing in New York. In exchange for cash, clothing, and payment of her cell phone bill, defendant would get oral sex and other sexual acts performed on him by Youngin' Number 1. On one occasion while driving in New York City, Youngin' Number 1 asked the defendant for money to buy her a cell phone. Being notoriously cheap, the defendant claimed to be broke. The upset Youngin' 1 began yelling, cursing, and screaming. Plaintiff begged defendant to pay Youngin's phone bill, which was less than $100. Now we're going to move on to Youngin 2. Now Youngin 2 is a Caucasian female. She is not a United States citizen. The defendant began having sexual relations with the Youngin 2 when she was 15 years old after a concert overseas. Defendant flew Youngin 2 to New York City and Miami, Florida on multiple occasions. Due to Youngin 2's body being adolescent and not fully formed, defendant paid for her to get a Brazilian butt lift.
On it. I gotta stop for a second. He's a defendant, and you paid for a child. Let me say that again. He paid for a child cause she just implicated that this guy could tell that this girl was underage. Y'all heard that right. He paid for a child to get a BBL. What in the entire hell? Let's get back into it.
Youngin 2 eventually left defendant and is now married to a professional athlete. Defendant 3 is a Latino female who met the defendant when she was 15 years old, turning 16. According to plaintiff, defendant was in love with Youngin number 3. He even contemplated leaving his wife. The defendant paid all of Youngin 3's bills and even took her overseas for his stops.
You won't. Never mind. Let it play.
Her to Florida and would put her in a condo he rented a few blocks from his house with his wife. In a recorded conversation, Youngin 3 and her 15-year-old cousin described in detail to plaintiff how inappropriate it was for defendant, who was in his late 30s at the time, to be fawning over youngins. The defendant sees no shame in his depravity towards youngins. Defendant Cartagena has demonstrated.
If this guy did mess with underage, and he knew that they were underage, put him under the jail. I'm sorry. Even if he did mess with these women underage, the dude's gotta go to jail. Cause bro, they just said you was in your late 30s. You shouldn't be at that age. Know the difference between a grown woman and a child. Bro, you gotta go to jail. It's plain and simple.
Cartagena has demonstrated a disturbing lack of remorse or discretion regarding his predatory behavior. Rather than conceal his actions, he has on multiple occasions alluded to or openly referencing sexual inappropriate conduct in his public persona and artistic output. In a song titled She's My Mama, defendant delivers lyrics that, when considered in context, reflect an unhealthy and troubling fixation on youngin individuals. The content of the song is explicit, suggestive, and disturbingly detailed, and defendant uses it to normalize, romanticize, or even boast about behavior that aligns with the pattern of coercive and exploitation described throughout the complaint. So let's get to this song's lyrics. Now she was only 16. I had to nurture that, give her some growth. Waited till I touched her. Told she's going to have to work if she's gonna get ahead.
Really, nigga? Really, Joe Crap? This is the same shit R. Kelly did.
Then she drove me berserk when she gave me some. She told me that she learned that from a P flick. I said, "Mommy, stop talking. Just I ain't say her name yet, so let's say she's nothing. Now watch me turn this nothing into something. Get it? Mommy, get in the kitchen. This is freebase. Just cook it till it's hard. Then cut it in eight. Take the trip across town to see Truth. Just get the money. Don't listen. That ninja think he cute. See all this money we got? We going shopping. Louis Vuitton, Gucci, we get it popping. We hit the club on some Clico shit. See the respect that you get from just being my bitch? Look, see them, they sick. They want to be in your shoes. That's the game that I hit her with to leave her confused. I'm just using her for paper. She want a man. I'm about to see my other bitch. But she understands. Based on information and belief, She's My Mama was written about youngin' number 3, who confirms and engaging in many of the acts outlined in the lyrics above. Furthermore, youngin' number 3 was required to hold jewelry, drugs, and other questionable items that are illegal to be in a child's possession when she traveled with defendant. Defendant's transportation of and sexual intercourse with these youngins constitutes violation of the following New York State, Florida, and federal laws. We've only made it to page 34 of this 157-page lawsuit, so we'll probably have to turn this into a series because it's just too much to deal with in one day.
Way
So
too
far,
crazy.
What do you think about it? I need to hear from you. What do you think about the wacky world of Mr. Fat Joe? Leave a comment, and you know how we do.